Yeah, Lindsay, it's so cool because you've taught in the US, you've taught in Thailand, you've taught in Korea, you've taught in English speaking schools, you've taught in Thai speaking schools, you've taught in English schools in Thailand and English, I don't know, it's all over the place. And what it made me think about is how, as educators, we so often should be questioning our own assumptions and like our own conditioning as to what we think should be brought into the classroom. And that was something that I felt really strong teaching abroad, particularly in Room because it was, you really felt the Thai culture in that school. And I would venture to guess, but maybe you could speak to this. Maybe you don't feel that as much in an international school, or maybe you do because you do have a lot of students that are coming from different backgrounds. So yeah, I'm just curious about that, how our students, how the culture we're in, the school, the type of school we're in, how that affects us as teachers.
Yeah, that's really interesting to think about that, because I feel like I've done a trajectory from like Roon being there's an intention to be a holistic school, right? There was there's an intention, and it hit a lot of the marks of what I believe holistic education to be. And also there was challenges, because with education, there's challenges with that as well, to where I am now, which is it doesn't feel, although there's a lot of Korean students, it doesn't feel Korean. Even my Korean Asian American colleagues, the Korean Americans that teach here, say like it doesn't feel even like Seoul when you're here. Like it feels like you're in the West. So it is interesting, the trajectory of what I've seen from Roon and being really culturally rich, to being somewhere that's still in a beautiful country full of culture, where you're kind of in this bubble where it's not. So like, how do you really meet the kids where they are in terms of celebrating their culture and building identity? And with the third culture child, there's a lot going on there too, and how that affects their identity development. You know what I mean? And that's those soft skills and social emotional awareness. It's just I'm sure it's really difficult for them, because it's like, we even say, like, we don't try to say, where are you from? We try to say, where are you coming from? Because the students can't answer that oftentimes. I don't know where I'm from. I don't know. That's just, it's so interesting to me to think about that.
Yeah, there's this part of it that's, I really like, this idea of having like a strong identity, really knowing where you come from, knowing who you are, really knowing your culture. And then I also value this like global identity, almost like, being culturally aware and to know different customs of different cultures and how to welcome in diversity. So it seems like there's probably some kind of sweet spot maybe that can incorporate both, but I don't know, do you have any insight onto, I don't know, how that looks or what it would look like to be able to, like, get in touch with, I don't know, with the identity of the place while also being open to more diversity?
I do a lot of like allowing it come from them. So less speaking and more listening. So if there's a question, I do bring in a lot of different texts from different cultures. And I try, like, through the language and literature program, bring in a lot of different authors that are from different cultures, and mostly focusing on the cultures represented in the classroom, and allow as much as I can for it to come from them. Like if something comes up like, oh, how is that from the last place that you've been? And not making assumptions, right? Like that's hard sometimes too, as humans, is like not making assumptions like, oh, you could really resonate with this person because he's also Spanish. Like, I don't know if you can resonate with him at all. So I think that's the tricky sweet spot, Camden, where it's like, you're trying to celebrate and really embrace their culture, but at the same time, without assuming anything about them, because they might not have ever lived. I'm just going to use like a student from like a Mexican background. They maybe never lived in Mexico or have any connection. So it's trying to find that sweet spot that I find I always have to be thinking about in order to maintain being culturally conscious when there's all these different cultures represented in one space. When I'm by myself, we don't have, I have a co-teacher, but he comes very, he doesn't come very often because there's a lot of students that need support that aren't in my class.
And you said this is 6th grade?
Seventh.
7th grade, okay. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there, what Camden was saying about, that cultural awareness. I wonder if that at that age, they can come up with their own ideas on how they can expand that. I don't remember, I taught 6th grade 50 years ago. It seems like, well, maybe, yeah, long time ago. So I don't remember what it was like to be in that age group anymore.
And it's quite interesting too, when I think there was a mapping activity we had done recently, and it was about like, we're just looking at like some cool thematic maps. And one of them was countries that were least welcoming to foreigners. And it came up as Korea being one of them, as more least welcoming. And the students they often find when stuff comes up like that, they're almost more critical of the cultures that they're from, that I'm finding, versus embracing their own culture. They're more critical, like of that. And they're all different maps. It was a bunch that talked to us about what was really great about Korea, and different cultures. But it was interesting to find too that the criticism that I feel more than the embracing of their culture, which I think is part of being a third culture kid, not really clinging on to it, so often reject it as well. So trying to uncover and kind of sit with that a little bit and understand it a little bit more too is something I'm working on.
For me, this conversation about culture is it's really fascinating, and it just gets so. It seems like it gets so big and so messy really, really quickly, because it's like we have you have culture in the traditional way of looking at culture, where you look at it from like a nationalistic point of view, where it's like, each nation has their national religion and a national language, and a way that they do art, and a way that they do music, and certain belief systems and value systems that nation state prioritizes. And then I'm thinking about, from a human development perspective, there is often talked about like the first culture that you experience, and the smallest culture, the microculture, is the family. So each individual is coming from a family unit, and that family unit also has its own unique way of doing things, the way that it's organized, its own belief systems and values that it prioritizes. So us as educators or people who work with youth, we have this sort of national conditioning, then we have our family conditioning, and each student has whatever their background is, their national conditioning and their family conditioning. And then the school itself, depending on the leadership and depending on the educators that are in a school, also creates a certain type of culture. Like Rungaroon had its own little cultural bubble that existed, which within the larger Thai culture. And then there's the culture that we're creating as educators in the classroom itself. So each classroom has its own way of being, so to speak. And when you enter that space, you understand that you're going to behave in a certain way, or that you either feel safe and comfortable in this environment and it's welcoming and inclusive, or not. It might feel the opposite way for some students. So I don't really have a point. I'm just throwing out there all of these things that are sort of bubbling up in my mind as we're talking about culture and tossing around this word in the conversation.
This is probably going to sound a little weird, but what if you started not from the bottom, from the circle of the family but what if you started like on a planetary scale? Like, what is the planetary? I mean, think of their starting out with, or even cosmic, how are they related to the whole universe, and work from that point. I mean, does that sound weird? Could you do that with children? I mean, you could start talking about where they, well, I mean, I have my own philosophy about that sort of thing. So, but what, does that make sense? I mean, that would bring them all together if they knew that, okay, well, we all belong, like here's this little dot in space, maybe introduce them to pictures from the Earth, from the moon. And so this is where we are. This is that, the Carl Sagan story about the blue dot, the pale blue dot. We all belong here. We all live here. We're all one organism, like the Earth is an organism, and we're all organisms, and we all live here, and that's who we are. And then, they would all feel included in that particular arena. I mean, just a thought. I'm like you. I'm going like, what might this look like, or how would this work? Exploring, ideas.
Yeah, I love that thought. I think it's, when you say that, I think of, our common humanity. We're all a human organism living on this little blue dot that's floating around in space. And I think when you take that as the starting point, it automatically connects you to everybody else. And then it's just like anything after that is just the added flavor. It's just your unique expression. So then it becomes a matter of, okay, we're all the same. And at the same time, we also have our own unique expression of that sameness.
Yeah.
And maybe that's where these smaller cultures come into play. There's a culture that connects us all. And then there's also cultural expressions that give us our unique individuality and way that we identify ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I especially love that idea of like our common humanity. And it makes me also think about like our common needs, right? Like when we think about the needs that we all share, and in a classroom setting, the need to feel safe is one thing that we all share. The need to feel that we belong. We all need that, just no matter what our culture is. So Viola, I really love that idea of cultivating that in a way. And we're all human, right? We all make mistakes, and we all say things sometimes that aren't right, or, hurt feelings, but not intentionally. So giving ourselves the space and the grace and allowing that space to happen and thrive, I think is one real great strength that the diversity in the classroom can bring. The empathy for different people that might have a different culture from you. And I think often too, as a segue of Jay mentioned a little bit about the family within other cultures too, the Korean culture, and I'm not trying to generalize when I say this, it's just what I've seen. And I've checked in with a couple of my friends, is a culture that very much isn't focused as much on social and emotional for their child. It's more like you have what you need from the family. The family will provide for you forever, right? They're very family-oriented culture. And you just need to do what you need to do. which might be a lot of my students go to school all day and then they go to Hagwon tutoring all night. They play multiple instruments all weekend long. They're performing or in sports. So when sometimes as a holistic educators, the cultivation of social emotional health kind of comes in contrast with maybe what's a cultural norm, can kind of be a challenge as well, I'm finding, when it's not prioritized in the family as much. So the need of feeling like you have space, or the need of feeling like just having the space to cultivate social emotional or talk about your feelings isn't something that is prioritized as much here, which I'm finding to be sometimes a challenge as well. So going off that thread a little bit too, like when our classroom culture comes in contrast with the culture of the outside is very interesting for me as well.
Yeah, and just for me, it kind of just brings that, what you said, Lindsay, brings things sort of full circle back to how we started with, you know, how do you bring holistic education into the classroom, or how do you bring a holistic way of teaching and learning into a setting where you're working with youth and children. And from what I hear you say, you're in a classroom with students who are predominantly coming from both a family culture and the societal culture that prioritizes the acquisition of knowledge and prioritizes academic learning that can be demonstrated on paper. And so what oftentimes is set to the side or not even recognized at all is the importance of emotional intelligence and interpersonal relationships. So it makes me think like, okay, well then, so in that context, holistic education is about like, how do I bring social and emotional learning into my classroom? Right. And so it's like, in that context, like there's no way you're ever going to make Seoul Foreign School a holistic school. You know, it's not, you're not working at that level, and it doesn't even seem like a possibility where we are right now to work at that level. So like, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that idea. And it's like, how do you, in your classroom, how are you bringing the holistic education piece of social emotional learning into that context that you just described?
Yeah, that's a great question. I find that, you know, I am at heart a holistic educator, and what happens in the class, I do have a lot of control over, and I do really love the school. The school has so many strengths. And I find this topic is probably the most challenging because they've never been taught the skills to think about themselves that way. So they haven't been taught how to be problem solvers, right? Or how to think about themselves as like, okay, this is really stressful. What tools do you have in order to deal with your anxiety? Mindfulness tools. They just have never been taught it. So when you bring it up or you cultivate it, or you, you know, like I do this thing, instead of saying like clap once if you can hear me, I always say like breathe in if you can hear me, breathe out. And they're like, that felt good. You know, like I do stuff like that, but it's like they've never been given the space to do that. And we have a good friend across the hall, and he says, you know, because that's not something from a young age, your parents will just do everything for you. And it's like, you don't have to think, you just have to do well in school. So yeah, even you bring it into the classroom, but it's like you're starting from the beginning with 13-year-olds on how to take care of themselves, how to be problem solvers, how to be mindful. Self-awareness is a huge one that is brand new. So for the group, like, it's like you're starting with skills that oftentimes were cultivated beautifully in kindergarten and preschool, is not something that's even thought about here. But when you mention it to parents, they're like, oh no, like that's not where we are. So you can, like, I'll still try to do it, and I still do it every day, and the students do embrace it, but it's so foreign for them. They're like, can you just tell me the answer? And then we can keep it moving. That's how they think. So it's interesting.
It's a good reminder, though, that one, it's nice to hear, Lindsay, that you're able to do it to whatever extent that you're doing it, even if it's just that opportunity to notice your breath. I mean, just to have someone out there who's in, the setting that you're in and is able to do it in small ways, because it's kind of like that question, well, how do we do it? Well, how do we bring it in? And it seems like that's a great start, is at the level of the teacher directly with the student. It doesn't necessarily have to maybe be the whole school culture. And even if they're already 13 and it's with one teacher that they have, I think that's something. And it's also just refreshing, not that, I've never actually taught in a mainstream school setting, but I think it's refreshing to hear that these things are important, because I think most of the messages that a lot of public school mainstream teachers get is it's all about the test, it's all about the academics. It's the message that the general culture is sending. And I think maybe that's also the case in Korea, is that's what's important. So that's what we're going to emphasize. And there's very few people who are saying, no, this is important. Like, your child needs this, and we need this as humans. And we don't get that input as much. So to have a teacher who's saying that to parents, even, I think even if it doesn't change it immediately, it's just like, like maybe it'll just plant a seed or cause just the smallest shift.
And you think of it's coming, when we speak of it, it's like, I don't want to at all make it seem like the family dynamic here is so beautiful. And you see, like, it's Chuseok, so it's a celebratory weekend, which is Korean Thanksgiving this weekend. And you spend the whole weekend with your family. And Jay and I went on a hike yesterday, and the families are out together, and there's so much love. And it's the love language. It's like, I will provide everything for you so that you can have every opportunity academically that you could possibly have. And it's quite beautiful. And also the social emotional piece is also so important. So it's like battle the two things, like it's not negative, but how they are helping support their children, but it's also, as knowing how it could be different, sometimes challenging. So I try to just be really conscious of language and really conscious of meeting parents where they are too. When I do have these conversations about what I feel like could be helpful, knowing that it's almost, I don't want to at all make them feel like they're doing anything wrong, because they're giving so much, everything they can, right? They're doing the best they can. So yeah, it's a challenge sometimes for me but I will continue to do it, because that's my philosophy, right? In a way that's also trying to be respectful.
Yeah, I really love what you just said there about meeting the parents and meeting the students where they are. And, although, like, from one perspective, you could look at the way that the culture is and be super critical of it, or from another angle, you could look at it and see how beautiful it is. And like, there are some core values that are just underneath the surface of what we see as like ultra rigid, ultra academic, and very like hard driven, that just underneath the surface of that activity is love and warmth and caring, caring for your family and wanting the best for your child, the only way that they know how to do that, because that's a part of the conditioning. And so what it makes me think of is you said meeting them where they are, and that's all about understanding yourself, understanding where you're coming from and understanding your conditioning, and being open enough to let another way of being, just be, and to be present to it. And what it makes me think of is like, okay, so we're talking in the context of holistic education and bringing holistic education to the classroom. And I think that opens up the idea of, it's not just about holistic curriculums, it's not just about, the teacher is also, the educator is also a curriculum, so to speak, like how the educator brings themselves into the classroom, regardless if it's a Rungaroon school setting where the whole entire organization is set up to try to be holistic, or a Seoul foreign school setting where holistic education isn't even on the radar, and you're just like the educator themselves and how they are in the classroom can be holistic or not in either one of those situations. Just because you have a holistic education school doesn't mean that the educator is embodying that and being that. It just makes it possibly easier to be that way because you're supported in a different way. So yeah, what you say makes me think of also the importance of, like, meeting people where they are makes me think of the importance of like the teacher as the curriculum, this idea of teacher as curriculum also.
I'm so deeply touched by what you said, Jason. That reminds me of the quote, or no, the story that one of the Dutch professors who spoke at one of the conferences in Southern Oregon, he was battling against this non-holistic educator, and then, for his child. And then he realized, me being against that non-holistic educator was not holistic, because being holistic educator is being present with whatever that is in front of you. Then when that hit him, he just changed and then opened up his space and then totally be there, to be this person in front of him as a whole person. And that totally changed the whole situation. That reminded me, your story reminded me of that. And then also, I've been to South Korea at one of the holistic learning conferences. Maybe you were there, I don't remember. Back in 2000, probably 19. Yeah, you were there, right? So I know, by going to the schools, I really felt that the high expectation of academics. And even the teachers at holistic schools were saying, it can be done in elementary school level, but junior high school is really rare to have that approach, because at the end of it, they expect to go to certain high schools or certain colleges. So I don't remember which, it was, I think, junior high school, that they are saying, this is miraculous that we can have this in junior high school level. So I can see that academics are being really valued. And coming from Japan, I also had a similar experience by going through this entrance examination. So that's another reason why I'm here learning about holistic education in my adult days. But but this is the yearning for, the whole human being, I think, to be able to connect the soul and then holistically in every level. So I wonder if you can bring that up in attributes of international schools, like open-minded or compassionate, initiative taking, that all are beautiful attributes. So somehow merging that with social emotional learning, holistic education, direction can be a good gateway. And then if you talk to the parents, this is the great leadership skills for the global citizens in the future. That might speak to them. Just my thought.
Well, so nice to see you again. I thought I recognized you. Yeah, and I think it's so interesting that what you both of you said, where it comes from within. And with MYP and the PYP and the IB program, it is all about this like global citizenship and profiles of caring and ways of knowing. Yet I feel like it's not oftentimes as important as the essential questions, right? Or the standards that the students are learning. But like, I think about all the things that SFS does do that are holistic. We have music every day. And every kid has music class every day. And that's so beautiful. And they have art every day. And they have experiential learning every other week. The kids are doing something in the community. Now, what we end up doing with that, I think, is the part where us as educators come in, like giving the time for the students to reflect on their learning from the experiential experience is an opportunity that I hope to help cultivate a little bit more, because I know that's such a big piece, because there is so much going on that wasn't happening at Runaroon, right? Like they didn't have music every day or arts every day in the upper grades. So I think like there's so much in both spaces that is helping support the whole child development. It's just what we do as educators with that, allowing the students to really think about themselves in that context is, as international teachers in a more academically rigorous environment, can really help support holistic education, I think.
Also, in the MYP, doesn't every single student have a supervisor for their service and learning project? And that's another like little avenue for reflection and going more deeply into something the students themselves selected. Am I not thinking right? But
Yeah. It's in 10th grade though. So it's only one time in 10th grade. Yeah, I just actually picked my project as every teacher in the school has 2 students. One of my students is running couch to full marathon. That's their project. And then another one I picked was about actually a female empowerment program in Korea. They want to start like a small female empowerment. So you are right, Robin, there is, but I think it's like, I'm excited to see how it works out here. Yeah, but that is absolutely a way to have individualized and experiential reflection on something you're interested in.
Yeah, I guess my big obstacle right now that I'm working with is this kind of culture of academic success or achievement, and how demanding that is across the board or seemingly uniformly in some of these countries. And I don't know, it's one of those questions, right? It's like, how do you begin to move that stick to where it's not all about, academic success? How many people are going to commit suicide? How many people are going to have to suffer from not paying attention to these things earlier on in their lives and in education? And it's frustrating because it seems like education and academic success is the only way to participate in our current economy, and that you need to have these credentials, you need to have these achievements in order to be a worthy global citizen. And that message, I think, is just so, it's so one-sided. It's just such a black and white message that I guess, yeah, I'm just trying to think of how to even change that messaging within myself to kind of live differently, you know, to be the educator that we were talking about in the room that holds space for a different type of wholeness, a different type of achievement or success. And how difficult that is to hold that space when you have a culture that is essentially pushing against that or denying it or being ignorant of it, whatever you want to call it. But it seems like a really courageous act, courageous act that I think a lot of places need, I think a lot of countries need, I think a lot of people need, is to have educators kind of stand strong in this message that, you know, this academic success is great and it's awesome, and success in this way it's beautiful, and it's not the whole picture, and just really putting importance on these other pieces, you know, self-awareness, right? Like, oh yeah, that can be 3% of the class or 2%, but, you know, could we make it 30% or like 25%, you know? I don't know.
Yeah, I really appreciate the direction that this conversation is going, and it makes me think of. Oh, by the way, hi, Ayako. I do remember you from the conference. If I remember correctly, you do heart math work with students doing and training on them how to connect with the heart. And yeah, so you had mentioned something about global citizen. So talking about within the context of teaching in an international school, and global citizenship being a piece of, it's a piece of that. It's a very big piece of that. And Camden, you know, you were just explaining about how you know, a lot of times the message of global citizenship, it oftentimes, I think it does end up being about like, okay, what's the most internationally recognized school that I can get into that has the, you know, the best credentials, you know, so the Harvard and the Stanford or the Yonsei or whatever it is. And then it's like, okay, so, and then the message gets real cosmopolitan about like, oh, I'm going to go into international economics and do, you know, international business or international trade and politics. And that's all fine and that's all good. But what Ayako was pointing to, I think, was like, there's a real opportunity with that global citizenship to bring the perspective of, you know, inner work and self-development, and like, okay, so what type of person do I need to be in order to be a global citizen? You know, like, clearly I have to be empathetic because I'm going to be dealing with all the cultures in the world, and I have to be able to meet people where they are. And, you know, in order to do that, I need to know myself, and I need to know my triggers, and I need to know my own conditioning. And so I think there's a real opportunity for holistic educators just with that little, in that little niche of the international education world and international schools, is like bringing that awareness to schools that being a global citizen means a lot more than just, knowing how to identify the different nations, or knowing a thing or two about international economics or international relations. So for me, that's really exciting. Just that it just seems like there's a lot of opportunity as holistic educators that we have nowadays.
Yeah, and then tell them that MIT Business School professor is teaching presencing. The presence is the key, self-awareness as a part of the business leadership program. Or was that California University? I forgot, fill me in. There is a good science center, or, all these top universities are looking for presence and self-awareness. And I think the key words for the business world 2 years ago was empathy. Or I forgot his name. The president of this famous company, was that Google, was also saying empathy is the key thing of the company. So if you look into the global business leaders, what they're looking for these days, they might be surprised. These are the key gateways that we can bring into holistic education in their mind of good schools and good global leadership skills.
Yeah, this conversation is super rich for me, and I could definitely go on forever. I had like a whole page of like, oh my goodness, all these guru things they could talk about. So in the future, if you'd ever want to continue this conversation, I would love to. It's been a real blessing for myself as an educator to have these experiences, and they've all made me grow a lot. So Ayako, I know you joined a little bit later, but I was at Runaroon with Andrea and Camden and Robin. And then I worked at another school in Thailand, an international school. And Jay and I recently just moved to Korea and to Seoul, and we really love it. And it's interesting to see like the difference in the programs and all the things that they really do well. And then some of the challenges as a holistic educator at heart that I find that I just have to maneuver through and figure it out. Because, I think a very small percentage of kids go to holistic schools, but they all deserve it, this type of education, right? They all deserve a teacher, I think, or an educator that focuses on their whole well-being. So like having more these conversations of how can we do it in schools that are more mainstream, whether it's a private or a public school, I think would help the majority or support more children. So I love these conversations because I find myself when I'm not surrounded by other people that necessarily think the same way. I need the space to often remind myself, of like, this is what I'm doing and this is where I'm at. So thank you so much. And again, I would love to continue another time if you invited me back to share.
You're always welcome back.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Oh,
Lindsay.
yeah, thank you. Nako, that's awesome. You'll be in Seoul. Psychological conference. Oh yeah, let's connect. I can send my email down below, and as well for you, Viola. It was so nice to meet you. I'll put my email down below, and we love to go catch up when you're here. We'll definitely be in town during that time. I put it down here.
Thanks for your share today.
Thanks for all of your contributions and thoughts. There you go. There's my email. In case you wanted to get in touch.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you,
Awesome.
everyone.
Yeah, good to see you. See you next time.
Thank you. Hope to see you again, definitely. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.